thank you for coming out and being a part of this. I'll start with a quote from John Lester: "The art challenges the technology, and the technology inspires the art." So we've had the first session with the art. We'll move on to the technology part now. As we continue, I'll be putting up some slides which are a part of the discussions. If we can have them. So from a technology standpoint, we are moving into IP. Standards are getting there. Andrew, what do you see where we are in terms of ST2110, control, NMOS?
Yeah, I think the standards have been developing over a number of years now. Certainly as a systems integrator, we've seen those standards mature. I think when we first started to do IP systems maybe 4 or 5 years ago, we were looking at proprietary systems, systems where the whole ecosystem was based on a single vendor sometimes. And as the market's matured and the standards have matured, we've seen that change and shift, and we've seen a greater reliance on sort of best-of-breed systems coming together. And that's really as a result of the standards maturing, really, and allowing us to do that. I don't think we're quite fully there yet. There are still some issues around control and some of those aspects, but certainly the main standards have certainly helped us to deliver projects to those standards over the last few years.
Right. Yusuf, in your view, you're part of 2454. How do you see IP? Are the standards there for you yet? What are the limitations?
From my point of view, IP was here for a long time. It's not a new thing. The new thing in IP today is the production, remote production, which is making it back to the picture. Most of for long years, and the post-production, media asset management, all these infrastructure there for IP. Now they introduce the IP for production, for remote production, and it will come with a lot of feature for the broadcast and the production company. It is something here and coming to stay. It's not fashion like some of the technology we saw in the few last year, 3D or those technology. There's a new technology, but it's come to solve a lot of challenge in the classic broadcast network.
Afzal, how do you see IP?
I agree that IP has been there for a very, very long time. And the most important part was, or not the important part, the confusing part was, every vendor has his own specification for IP, their own standards. This was driving broadcasters crazy because you cannot commit to one specific standard from one specific vendor on a proprietary standard. This will add a lot of in a typical broadcast environment, you work with so many vendors, you work with so many products. If you commit to a particular standard which is not accepted by other vendors, this obviously is going to create a huge bottleneck for you in your workflow, in your system. So I think 2110 by far has been a very matured step so far, very matured standard so far, where it has been ratified with by SIMT and has been accepted by all the vendors. All the vendors, I think, unanimously have agreed to come forward and adapt this standard as de facto standard for the broadcast equipment and broadcast products moving forward on IP. So I think it's getting there. It's getting more and more mature by the day. And we are not very far where we see complete IP deployment over other broadcast facilities around the world.
David, with respect to IP, how can news benefit from it?
So we already do. If you look at news, it comes down to speed and efficiency. News only has a certain shelf life. The end-to-end ecosystem is quite complex, but at least from a delivery to consumers, IP is absolutely necessary. It means we can create platforms for people to actually view our content, make it as live as possible. On the contribution side, we're very much heavily invested in IP for our news gathering for live content. We probably have about an 80-20 rule right now where 80% of our content from a live capacity is delivered over an IP network or public internet. I think it comes down to where that speed of getting content to a viewer in the broadcast chain in the traditional studio can benefit from IP, not just from an IP backbone and infrastructure, but a software layer stack. So having more software to build the production rather than simply a box connected to a box connected to a box going baseband back to IP. So it can benefit a lot. News tends to be on the bleeding edge. It's almost a bit of a Wild West in terms of production. So waiting for standards is probably not going to be where we need to be. But we have a low tolerance for failure, so we have to move to a point where that stabilizes really quickly.
Right. Andy, how do you see the international arena in terms of COTS versus broadcast vendors when it comes to IP infrastructure?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen again, we've seen a migration, I guess, over the last 3 or 4 years. I think certainly the early systems that we were doing, you know, we were looking at single vendor solutions, as I said before, and they tended to be proprietary. They tended to be based on sometimes proprietary standards, and I think really that was the industry's reaction to their, you know, not really being a kind of you know, set of standards that were there at the time. I think this slide kind of illustrates that to a certain extent. You can see at the early, it kind of comes down in terms of time and chronology, but it starts with vendors, single vendor solutions, and then kind of moves forward. These are the IP projects that we've delivered as a company over the last 4 or 5 years. But you can see towards the bottom of that slide a much more reliance on COTS hardware, commercial off-the-shelf switches and switch technology. And that's really allowing us as broadcasters and as systems integrators to kind of tap into a much bigger market than we could ever sustain as a broadcast market. I remember somebody from one of the switch manufacturers telling me, it was around about 10 years ago, that even at that point, the whole of the broadcast industry, sort of equipment market, was only worth about the same as the Ethernet switch market. So this whole IT industry, we can leverage its R&D, we can leverage its manufacturing, and that's really what we're starting to see now is with the maturity of these standards, we're now starting to see the ability to use these COTS hardware. So yeah, we're certainly seeing, certainly in America and in Europe, seeing good adoption of those standards, and we've done a number of projects now that have utilized those standards.
Right. From a business standpoint, Yusuf, what do you see as the main barriers and challenges in terms of approaching an IP-based or IP-centric production project?
Okay, remote IP production, the IP and the productions come to change the game, introduce a new player. Usually I model the business of production in a triangle with 3 corners: the viewer, the technology, plus the content. And this equation with IP, it has new players coming to the picture, which is the telecom. Because most of the production, when we talk about remote production, because usually we do production within the same facility. The new challenge will be the production, placing, for example, the OB from a remote distance. And this type of technology introduce a new challenge. This is one of the picture. The second thing on the challenge of the business, the IP come with a new feature for the production, on the production part. It's come with the features, it come with the challenge to the people who will produce the content. And this content will touch direct the viewer on the home. So if they use the same concept they used to do it to produce the content using the classic way of doing the business, that will not give the feature of IP for the people. So I think it is also education for the production companies, education for the technology people, is education somehow for the viewer.
Right. So even though there is an increased cost of going for an IP system, but it leverages itself against reduction in OpEx.
It is difficult to decide if you don't have the infrastructure, because people, they will say the cost of the revamping the infrastructure, but there is another cost is hidden with the project. Connectivity, one of the costs, it has to be considered. Then the training and developing the team, they are going to deal with the technology. And this is all cost to be built as OpEx or CapEx. So the equation, unless you do the exercise and develop and utilize all the IP feature in your system, it will be a little bit vague. It needs more analyze, more depth analysis on the way of doing to implement and apply the change of the IP.
Afzal, what do you see as the business challenges for moving towards IP?
See, there will always be challenges. You know, whenever you talk about new technology or migration to a new technology from, like, you know, the older generation, there are always challenges. But I think if you plan it right in a gradual step-by-step manner, these challenges can be overcome. You know, the more difficult challenge was to arrive as a standard on IP side, which I think has been, like, more or less sorted out. And we will see a lot of deployment, as I said earlier. Internal challenges, obviously, like, you know, organizations like us, we have huge infrastructure, like, you know, in various areas of production, post-production, transmission, OBs, SNGs. So obviously, if we have to implement it across the entire network, it's a lengthy process. It is a learning process, which will take time, it will take effort, and we will all learn through, like, you know, when you're doing the upgrade, you all go through a learning phase. So we have been actually looking at this very, very closely in last couple of years. In fact, we did an RFI, a couple of RFI, in fact, last year to, like, you know, get feedback from vendors, technology providers, system integrators on how do they feel, like, you know, this migration from HDI to IP would happen. Obviously, last year, it was last year or maybe a year before that. Obviously, the standards were not so matured, and unanimously everybody came back and they said, I don't think that that's not the right time to, like, you know, invest into IP. You commit, it's too early if you have to go complete IP route. We still have some time, and I think now the time is almost come. We are almost maturing. So I think we will take a gradual step, like, you know, in particular areas of the network where we feel it will be easy, because, you know, it's a 24/7 operation. We have channels running on air, we have studios producing content every day, OBs are covering event every, you cannot, like, you know, we cannot shut down one thing and, like, you know, because, I mean, we have gone through the similar cycle when we upgraded from SD tape-based environment to a 3G complete, you know, we have invested heavily in the last 6 years on a 3G file-based system. So we cannot overlook that fact also that a huge investment has gone into that. Okay, but we also accept at the same time there is a limitation to which, you know, your 3G infrastructure can grow. And we are obviously actively looking at going at higher resolution. A higher resolution will automatically imply we have to go on the IP route. So there have been some ongoing discussions. There have been a lot of, like, you know, educational meetings and discussion with the vendors and providers. So we are still studying. We have almost have an initial draft, and we know internally how we're going to proceed in direction, and hopefully we will be proceeding in that direction shortly.
David, for news, I mean, we have some rough projection which shows the IP costs 20%, 20 times more than what a STI facility would. It takes 2 times the effort to get it up and running. How do you see those challenges? And if you were to undertake such a project, how would you address them?
Look, so I think it does come back to you have to look at what investment's there. So from a news perspective, we have some aging infrastructure, but it comes back to those chunks of how we get content to an end user. If I look at the relationship between maybe a journalist in the field in riots in Lebanon to a viewer either on our linear platform, on our OTT platforms, or on the web, there is that big chunk in the middle. We know the contribution might be via IP, but what investment would I need to make? Where's the value add if I have an IP backbone? And what is the relationship between journalist and viewer to get there? So at the moment, I don't foresee that we will need to go to an IP backbone for our production facility right now, because getting that content from the field in an event that's happening now to an end user with quality, efficiency, and all the rest of it, it happens. I would have to break a lot of things, like you say, in a 24/7 production facility to pull it out and go IP. But I think over time, that relationship of the human production side of things and how we would go into an IP world that puts all of those production elements together to assist the journalist telling the story to the end user is where we'll start to see a lot more investment. And I don't feel that the technologies are there to help us drive that just yet. But over time, and hopefully that's in a 3-year time frame, that we will start to roadmap exactly what that production backbone looks like to get our content out to a viewer.
Being an SI and working with different customers, surely you've come across a number of challenges, both commercials and operational.
Yeah, I mean, it's always an interesting conversation. We get some clients who come to us with an open mind and an open book, and they just say, what do we want to build a new facility? What should we do? We get other clients who come and just say, I want to go IP. And really, what our job is to really kind of sit down with that client and really try to understand what they're trying to achieve. And as you identify, there are certain times when actually an IP solution isn't the right thing. And then there are other times where it makes a huge amount of sense. And the slide here just kind of illustrates some of those kind of key things that really drive people towards an IP solution around sort of scalability. And you were just mentioning before about Afzal, an upgrade to HD. And obviously, one of the big advantages of an IP solution is being able to do those kind of upgrades without necessarily replacing some of the infrastructure and so on. So you really have to kind of analyze what the client's wanting to kind of achieve in order to determine whether IP is the right solution. And actually, in the UK, we've done 3 projects over the last year where we're actually doing 4K over copper and fiber actually in those cases. So we are still seeing baseband installations sitting alongside. We showed that slide before of a great stack of large-scale projects that are being done in IP, but there are still projects being done in baseband as well.
I think it's more of a business case, with each client. What do the client want to achieve? When you talk about IP, it's a very generic term. IP gives you a lot of flexibility, scalability. So it depends what is the roadmap for the client in the immediate future and then the long-term future. If you want to achieve a cloud-based infrastructure, you want to do virtualization of your system, then obviously your approach will be different from a client who just want to go on a higher resolution. So it also depends on the business case study. Client to client.
It can be quite difficult to make that business case in the short term, though, because actually some of these benefits will come quite in quite a few years' time, and often businesses are only looking at ROIs on a 2 or 3 year cycle. So yeah, we've had those conversations where we found it difficult to justify something that actually we know in the future is going to reap benefits for that business. But yeah, that's sometimes quite difficult to get over the line with certainly a corporate level.
Sure. Also, just I want to add a small point. There are difference between a broadcaster and people that facilitate production, and like for example 2454. And if it is a big installation, it can show the cost saving because, as you know, you can build now more studios with less galleries. And this will reflect on the capex of the project itself. It will give also flexibility to utilize those infrastructure and the technology for long term. So the break-even time will be shorter for you, and also a feature for the people who want to just turn over the studio from one production to the second production. So all these maybe can build in the business model and the financial model if you are going to build a new facility. For people that want to change only, it is, yes, it's a challenge because especially for news or for broadcaster, they don't want to go off air, and they don't have also the budget to build mirror technology, mirror site to start to do the revamping of their old infrastructure. So it is a challenge for some people, and it is an opportunity for some people, depends on the nature of the work itself.
I think that's a solid point. I think IP introduces significant scalability, and to that point, that IT infrastructure and in fact IT sensibilities, it's a larger industry than ours. If we can tap into a far more IP-based infrastructure, this industry will start to see the benefits of that. If you look at an AWS, for instance, they represent about 40% of the spend in the IT industry alone. They've shown that that scale allows them to offer services, and in fact, on a large scale, you're going to see a quicker return on IP. It may be that it won't be for myself as a broadcaster to be looking at IP, but rather than myself as a broadcaster looking to invest in IP, I will look at IP service-oriented architecture to go to, because a service provider like 2454 may have a return on that benefit much faster than I would.
In terms of resources, do you think there's a requirement of training, development within the broadcast industry as we move towards IP?
If you mean resources, the manpower, they are, okay. Yes, there will be some challenge, maybe not come as they've said today, but in the future, the benefit, as much as the IP become common and a lot of vendor, they start to develop their equipment, their features on this equipment to utilize the benefit from using the capsulate of the IP, and instead of doing all in one device, they can start to introduce multi-function devices, and they start to build more feature on the production itself, do it more interactive. Yes, there will be two type of training, two type of developing the people. People who are going to create the content, they create it in a different way, would maintain the same nature of this content. And also training for the technology people, because the transition time for using the old technology to the new technology, and they need to develop more about the IP, about the security, about the networking, about the telecom, which has come part from this also the picture, as I said before. So yes, there's be a huge developing curve to fully utilize the IP feature in the future.
I'll take the security element from what you said. So as we move towards IP, news, security becomes an absolute risk and a point you need to protect, I guess.
Security and news content don't necessarily go hand in hand. And it's always been a challenge. But look, from making sure that the infrastructure is secure so that it's only our message that's getting out rather than somebody getting in the middle, yes, you're right. But I've spent the last 5 years before I joined Sky News in the security and online space. I spent a lot of time trying to convince operators that I had a security service based in the cloud that could be, in fact, more effective for them as an operator and actually more secure. And in that sense, it actually is the case. If you architect correctly in an IP world, there's no reason to fear security. It just happens to be that it's not necessarily that infrastructure, but in the way we connect to the world, a broadcast infrastructure tended to be an island in the past. Even if it's not purely IP, there is going to be that hybrid. We have MAM systems, we have non-linear edit now that are IP connected. They're going to have to be connected to the outside world. So security becomes more a piece to talk about because, in fact, you have to connect it. You can't leave it there as an island.
What do you feel about security?
No, I will just skip security for the time being. The interesting discussion on the human resource is a very interesting discussion because, we always have a debate whether we should take an IT engineer and train him like, for the broadcast
Broadcast
standards,
or broadcast
or
to
you
an
take
IT.
the broadcast guy, engineer, and train him on the IT or on the IP stuff. I think it's, I mean, not that I am biased because we're from the broadcast industry, but I think it makes much more sense to train a broadcast engineer more on the IP stuff because, primarily the functionality of both these engineers are maybe an SLA, for example, an SLA for an IT engineer is completely different for an SLA of a broadcast engineer. Your IT systems can be down for an hour and that's still acceptable, which is not the case in the broadcast scenario. So the broadcast engineers, they come from the same mindset. They know what are the minimum requirements for sustaining your signals. Plus, we have all been working in some sort of an IP environment, even in the broadcast domain since so many years. So we have been dealing with data, we have been dealing with switches. So the engineers in the broadcast side already are adapted to that kind of environment. Just to give some additional training on the networking, I think would be a very good mix for a broadcast engineer to be on the IP side.
I think the only challenge there is that there's not enough people coming through as a broadcast engineer. So the opportunity to take an IP engineer, and there's a difference. If you have an IP engineer who is maybe, let's say they're far more corporate IT-centric, yes, then they don't understand necessarily the speed of response in the SLA. But if you look at infrastructure engineers and those that maybe looking after large SaaS solutions, they most certainly understand that there is SLAs that have to be 4 nines or above.
Yeah, maybe the new generation of IT engineers who have been working on SaaS kind of platform, they are still more up to the requirement. But I was talking from the corporate IT perspective.
Sure.
Well, if you get in a different opinion, maybe we can evolve our operations.
Sorry?
If we get a different set of opinions, like an IT engineer, not having a broadcast, let's say, brain behind them, maybe we could, evolve our operations and migrate away from the monolithic approach.
I think it will happen, but it will take some years. I mean, you have been working in one direction for the last so many years. It cannot happen overnight.
True.
It will happen gradually as your infrastructure progresses on that direction. Automatically, people's mindset, their mentality, the way they operate, the way they function will change. It will develop, but don't expect this to happen overnight.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly taken us probably 4 or 5 years, I think, to train our own internal workforce around how to deliver IP systems. It's a different mentality. It's a different way of delivering. You integrate them in a different way. And the approach that Diversified took was to build an IP roadshow, which was essentially a fully operational IP system in a couple of flight cases. And then they took that on the road and essentially trained all our local offices. And actually that tool has really become, it started off as an internal tool, but it's now become an external tool. We're finding companies come in and sort of saying, hey, can you run the IP roadshow for us? And it's been a useful tool without actually having to invest in the technology. They can do some of the training on that system. And it's been a useful way of kind of developing that. It's actually something we're going to bring to CABSAT next year as well. So be a good opportunity for everyone to have a look at it.
That is where the opportunity comes from training. The speed of adoption is going to be much faster if you have your broadcast engineering workforce trained up because they actually understand the ecosystem and they will adapt that technology faster.
Yeah.
So when you're designing an IP system, how different is that from an STI system?
I think it comes down to the way that you map out the way the signals are going to move around the system. I think we've been used to a point-to-point architecture over the years, where a single cable will carry a single signal. Certainly for me, that's been the biggest transition, is thinking in terms of bidirectional signals and signals that can, or single cables, fiber optic cables that can carry multiple signals. So yeah, I think that's probably the biggest challenge, and it's thinking about how you do that efficiently within a system. So we get much more involved in fiber management and using MTP cables to pass signals around and things like that. So yeah, they've been the sort of main challenges, I think.
Right. Is any of you at the moment thinking about going IP at any form or any element within your processes?
No.
All right, fair enough.
Going towards IP?
Yeah.
Yeah, as I said, I mean, we have a roadmap. We are working towards it. Now that the standards are matured, we have been considering a couple of areas where we can start off with. And once we finalize that, I think we will see it rolling very soon.
Yeah, we have also a roadmap to develop new studios in our media city, it is announced, in Yas Island. And there will be some few studios. Of course, we going to the new technology, will not stay in the old domain. Bringing to this roadmap a lot of training, a lot of developing, a lot of not only the engineer, we have also a training program for the operator as well, to producer as well. So we will be ready whenever we have the studios to operate in the high maximum utilities and full utilization of the equipment, plus readiness of the technical and the operators as well.
All right. Well, thank you so much.